The rival parties in the Libyan conflict and their international backers have agreed at a summit in Berlin that an arms embargo must be respected and strengthened to reach a lasting ceasefire on the ground. A follow-up committee on Libya will be set up, which would spell out further steps needed to reach a ceasefire. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he's very worried that several oil ports and an oil field have been shut down in Libya. Forces loyal to Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar have shut off production at all Libya's major oil fields. The move threatens to strangle the country's finances and overshadowed today's International Peace Summit in Berlin. Now, for the latest at the Libyan Peace Summit in Berlin, we cross live to SABC Correspondent Ira Spitzer. Ira, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Well, talks have just wrapped up in the past hour here in Berlin, and we heard from German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was chairing these talks and essentially trying to broker peace talks between the rival Libyan factions, as well as the various international players who have become increasingly involved in this conflict. And what appears to have happened is that Merkel was able to extract promises, at least from countries such as Turkey and Russia and the United Arab Emirates, who have been supporting this conflict in various ways to reduce the amount of foreign interference, and also from conference participants a promise to respect the United Nations arms embargo in Libya. So that seems to be the outcome of this conference. What we didn't have, as some had hoped for, is a ceasefire commitment from the two Libyan factions, that is the UN-backed government in Tripoli and the rebel forces led by General Khalifa Haftar. Apparently, those two, while they were both in Berlin, did not actually sit down for face-to-face talks. So this peace process, well, perhaps some progress was made here, doesn't really seem to have had that breakthrough moment that some had hoped for.
Well, now that the participants agreed to respect the arms embargo and vowed to provide no further military support to the warring factions in Libya, what's the next course of action for these participants, especially these international superpowers, looking at the vested interest that these countries have on Libya?
Well, I guess the first question, of course, is whether those commitments, despite what we heard today, the first question is whether they will really be respected on the ground. Of course, Turkey, for instance, recently sent troops into Libya to support the government there. So what happens with those troops now? Are they just going to go home? I think there's a lot of open questions about what exactly these commitments mean. But going forward now, of course, the international community has shown this tremendous interest and pressure and need to find somewhat of a way forward in this conflict. So those talks will undoubtedly continue. This was a very high-level meeting. We had the heads of state from Turkey, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, the European Union leaders. So you had all of these factions here. So all of these factions have certainly an interest in what's happening. And the reason for that is that Libya is just incredibly important, both strategically as well as the oil and gas resources that it controls. So many people involved now, and they also want to keep the conflict from further escalation. So there is a fragile truce in place at the moment, but as I mentioned earlier, not that long-term ceasefire that some had wanted. So the conflict will continue, but in exactly what form, we don't quite know yet, given what's happened here.
Well, you just mentioned some of the vested interests that these countries have on Libya, such as oil and gas. And I would imagine how difficult it will be for Berlin to convince all the parties participating at this summit to stop providing weapons to the warring parties in Libya and to stop interfering by all means in Libyan affairs.
Right. I don't see foreign interference going away completely. I think that would be an unrealistic expectation. I would imagine that, again, given the high level of participants here and interest, that there will be some sort of outcome from the conference, although it's hard to say yet exactly what that will be. But just to give you a sense of the competing interest in Libya, for example, in December, Turkey signed a memorandum of understanding with the Libyan government for significant gas exploration off the Mediterranean coast. So that agreement, for example, if General Haftar's forces were to prevail, that agreement would likely suddenly go out the window, leaving Turkey in a not happy about the situation. On the other side, the United Arab Emirates, Russia, Egypt, and others have offered support to the opposition because of their own strategic interests in the region. So I think here in Berlin, we started to really see the European side become more engaged. And in fact, we heard from the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson ahead of the conference saying that if the ceasefire were agreed, the UK would be willing to put people on the ground to monitor that ceasefire. That's also something we heard from Germany, from the European Union. So those are the kind of discussions that are happening right now about the situation in Libya.
Any word on the shutdown eastern oil ports, which were shut down by forces loyal to General Haftar?
Right, no updates that I'm aware of out of the Berlin conference about the shutdown of those oil ports. Now, what General Haftar's forces who shut down those ports said was that this was a response to the Turkish troops that have been sent to the country. But of course, shutting out those gas or those oil revenues from the Libyan government has a tremendous financial impact. So that is a situation that the rebels may feel give them some leverage. It likely does, but it definitely also complicates the peace process because, well, in Berlin, things might seem like they're on the right track. I think when you look at the ground, on the ground as to what's happening in Libya, there's quite a different story there.
Because the big risk, Ira, is that some of the participants will merely pay lip service to the diplomatic initiative, even as they continue to fuel a war in Libya and continue funding and supplying weapons to the warring factions. So is there any provision coming out of that summit as to what should happen to those countries which still continue to interfere in the affairs of Libya and continue providing weapons to the warring parties there?
Right. Well, in the communique that all the participants agreed on, there were certainly some potential consequences, at least laid out, if not in great detail, to violating that arms embargo. But again, it's hard to see things doing a complete 180. We've had this military support from the United Arab Emirates. Russia appears to have sent in, well, not official forces, some military contractors and things of that nature who have intervened on behalf of the rebel forces. So it's hard to see that whole situation completely changing just because of what happened today. But we don't know that yet. So I think the proof will really be what happens in the days and weeks to come with that foreign interference.
Now, in another development, Egypt, do you understand, is seeking international mobilization against the Turkish military intervention in Libya. Now, this is one that Egypt will not get on a silver platter, is it not?
Right. Egypt has certainly been a strong supporter of the Libyan opposition led by General Khalifa Haftar. And what we've seen in general with Libya is that this conflict has had a destabilizing effect on neighboring countries. Now, Egypt is a neighboring country with its own issues, but we certainly have seen in the Sahel region the free flow of arms and militants through Libya because of the lawlessness there has had a destabilizing effect. In the same vein, the lack of a functioning government in Libya has really enabled the country to become the main hotspot for people smuggling into Europe, migrants leaving from Libyan ports in a very uncontrolled manner. So this is all reasons why Europe, as well as the neighboring countries, are trying to push for a peace agreement here. But is it too late? That is what has some people worried.
Ira Spitzer, our SABC Correspondent, coming to us live from Berlin in Germany. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. That was our reporter or our correspondent just giving us an update on the big stories coming from Berlin, wherein participants at that Berlin summit have agreed to, to respect the arms embargo and vowed to provide no further military support to the warring factions in Libya. This is the Globe on SABC News. We'll take a quick break. We'll have more in a moment.